brought to you by the University of South Alabama's Speakers Bureau. My name is Cynthia Tucker. I am the journalist in residence at the University of South Alabama, and I am the moderator for our fall series of Talk Thursdays. If you joined us for our summer series, thanks for being back with us. And our fall series is much like our summer series. We are featuring a series of University of South Alabama experts who will tell us what they do at the university and share with us in their area of expertise. Today, our first speaker for our fall series is Jennifer Knutson. She is the newly appointed curator of the University of South Alabama Archaeology Museum. She has nearly 10 years experience as a public archaeologist and educator. She is the editor of Project Archaeology Investigating Migration, a curriculum guide for grades 7 to 8, and it's due to be published this year. She received her bachelor's degree in anthropology from the University of North Florida, and she is working on finishing her master's thesis at the University of West Florida. Her focus is on Campbelltown, an 18th century French Huguenot colony in British West Florida. Welcome, Jen Knutson.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell us first a little bit more about what exactly you do at USA's Archaeology Museum. And I'll bet there are some in our audience who didn't even know the university had an archaeology museum.
Yeah, so my duties as the education curator is I manage all aspects of the museum, its day-to-day operations, its educational programming, event planning and coordination, and taking calls from the public about things of interest that they see and find in Mobile and in their neighborhoods. I have so many things going on. We have field trips that visit and so many things, exhibit maintenance, the maintenance of the museum. We also curate a native plant garden on the museum's grounds. So make sure everything out there is going well, looking great. We are so thankful for our facilities management and our landscaping folks on campus. They do a great job in helping me, and I couldn't do it without them. So lots of things.
So I think that when many of us think about archaeology, we think about faraway places, digging up Roman artifacts somewhere in Europe, maybe, or exploring Israel for ruins back to the time of Christ. So talk about archaeology in Mobile, Alabama, and the Gulf Coast region, and what in this area is in the museum, what from this area, and what is interesting to archaeologists about this region.
The Gulf Coast is an amazing archaeological resource and of cultural heritage. We have sites that go back at least 12,000 years. Wow. In prehistory. We also have our historical sites, colonial sites, and early American sites. So we have an amazing abundance of archaeology here. There's also maritime archaeology. We're right on the Gulf Coast. So, and when I say maritime, that includes historical resources as well as prehistoric resources. So this is really And I tell a lot of students that come through the museum, they're thinking about Egyptian archaeology and all of that wonderful archaeology on the far side of the world. But we have amazing sites here, amazing, and some of the earliest in the Southeast. For example, we all know that pottery begins in China 10,000 years ago. But pottery begins in North America about 3,000 years ago, not too far from here. We have just an amazing abundance of archaeology and resources. And when we have young people visit the museum, there are lots of jobs for archaeologists in the Southeast. So it's a wonderful career.
So you grew up in North Alabama, is that correct?
I did.
So when did you become interested in archaeology? Were you interested as a child? Where along the way did you develop an interest in archaeology?
So all archaeologists, all American archaeologists are anthropologists. Anthropologists study people. So there's 4 different fields in anthropology. There's archaeology, there's linguistics and languages, there's cultural anthropologists who may study a business culture or a culture that's different to them. And then there's also our bioarchaeologists or forensic anthropologists. And for me, I grew up in North Alabama, and I lived with my grandparents, and they always told stories about when they were children and growing up, and about the days before electricity and indoor plumbing and telephones and all of this modern technology, what the world was like. My grandma loved antiquing, so we always went to antique stores. My Uncle Jack would take me to freshly plowed fields, and we would go arrowhead hunting. So I grew up really appreciating the past and the stories from the past. And so I knew I always wanted to study something like that. And I was always fascinated by it, like everyone else, on National Geographic and on TV and documentaries. And I would watch those with my grandmother. And when I took my first anthropology course, that was it. That I knew that was what I was going to do. And I have not stopped since. I am very, very passionate about it and have just always really, really enjoyed it. It is my job, but it doesn't seem like work. I get to do what I want to all day long. Yesterday, I looked up and it was 2 p.m. before I even looked at the clock for the first time. So I just enjoy it so much.
So tell us, what exactly is a public archaeologist?
Well, I think a lot of people have heard of a public historian who work at public parks and historical sites and help interpret those areas for the public. And that's very much like a public archaeologist. Good science is science that is disseminated to other scientists, but it's also made available for the public. And it's a way, public archaeologists is what archaeologists rely on to make sure that their work is available to the public. So whether it be that TV documentary on National Geographic, or someone giving you an archaeological site tour, or knowing how to take the complicated science language and make it into terms that we all understand. Designing curriculum and lesson plans for educational purposes for children. All of those things are part of presenting archaeology to the public. And it's very important that archaeologists have public support for their work. Because a lot of archaeology is funded by grants and tax dollars. And for example, the museum is afforded its place on campus by the university. We have to have university support. So it's very important that the public understand what we do and why it's important. And that is the job of a public archaeologist.
So you talked about some of the educational programs. The museum rather is available to the general public. And you have, I assume, elementary and high school students who come. You talked about field trips. Where do you go? What are some of the places you take them?
So right here at the museum, it's a rather large museum. And our director, Dr. Carr, who's also the director of the Center for Archaeological Studies, explained it nicely last week. He said, an archaeology museum, there's a few places in the United States where a college campus hosts an archaeology museum. And one of those places is Penn State, and the other one is Harvard. The third one is here at the University of South Alabama. So we had about 3,000 K through 12 students visit the museum each year before the pandemic. And of course, last year we were closed. This year we are available for field trips. So any educators out there, please email us and I will be glad to set that up for you. We offer a guided tour of the museum and the plant garden. And it also includes an archaeology activity customized by the grade level, maybe what the teacher is presenting in her class at the time, his or her class at the time. So we have an educational activity as well as the guided field trip to offer teachers. And we have several reservations for this fall and spring. And so I am just so glad to see students come. They're masked, they're social distanced. We tend to break them up in groups and rotate groups through, so we're not all in the same space at the same time, but we're still able to be here and have it open for them to come.
What are the hours that the museum is open?
We are open Tuesday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. However, it is my goal that we be open at least one Saturday per month for families or for people who work during the week. Now, I would like to say that that's the fourth Saturday every month, and we all know when it is. But we have an amazing football team, go Jags, and they have home games, and that makes it complicated with parking and getting on campus. So what I am doing is I have a schedule for the rest of the fall semester of when we are open on Saturday for those public days. We are actually open for 2 public days in October. So going to the next thing, which is upcoming events, if you would permit me to go ahead and start talking.
Absolutely.
About that. Okay, so and speaking of the Jags, we are also tailgating at the museum every home game. So if you want to pay to park or you have a ticket, you're a ticket holder, you can come to the museum. We're the only building on campus besides the Hancock Whitney Stadium that is open on home game days. And so we are tailgating. We have some fun activities. We have air conditioning and water and bathrooms as you make your way to the stadium. So you can come join our tailgate. So those Saturdays are listed here on our webpage. We also will be open in October for 2 amazing upcoming events. The first one, I have the flyer here. Oh, it's backwards. But Halloween at the museum this year on Saturday, October 9th. And so we're going to do some trick-or-treating, and there's going to be lots of education in there if they realize it or not. So we'll be doing Halloween at the museum. We'll have 7 activity areas, and we'll start in the native plant garden, and we'll keep each little family group separate and stagger them through the native plant garden for trick-or-treating and then through the museum. And then they'll do activities along the way. Of course, there'll probably be a little bit of candy. But so that'll be Saturday, October 9th, and it is from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Masks are required and costumes are encouraged. The other event this October we're going to have is on Saturday, October 16th, again from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. October is Alabama Archaeology Month. October 19th is also International Archaeology Day. So we're lucky to have those two things in the same month. So on Saturday, October 16th, we will be celebrating both, and we will play, we're going to be testing out some prehistoric technology. If you've heard of an atlatl, it's the
Never heard of it.
It's the precursor to the bow and arrow.
Oh, yes.
Opportunity to play with one of those. We will also have some other games, some Native American outdoor games that we may play. I'm a historical archaeologist, which and the French is my specialty. So we're probably going to play some pétanque, a French game as well, something that they were playing here in Mobile in the 1700s. We have evidence that they played pétanque with old cannonballs. So we're going to play a little pétanque, some Native American games, try out some Native American technology, and have activities in the museum open as well. So tailgating, those two events in October, and then we also have events coming up one Saturday in November and December. So we have lots of programming available, and of course we're open Tuesday through Friday. I recommend, if you want to visit during a weekday, that you email the museum, and I'll put that email in the chat. But it is helpful to have a parking pass. You need a parking pass to park on campus. So I can email you one in advance of your visit and a map that will tell you exactly where to park to be close to the museum. So if you want to email me, I will make sure you can print your parking pass at home, or you can come to the museum and I'll have it ready for you. Either way.
You've made it very, very easy for visitors. Let me ask you to talk a little bit more. You're a historical archaeologist. Talk a little bit more about some of the Native American groups who were here very early on. They were the first settlers to this region. And then after you talk about them a bit, maybe you'll talk some more about the French, because that's your specialty. You're certainly in the right place for that. I have been reading, I have spent some time reading some books about what is now the state of Florida, before it was the state of Florida, and the interactions among Native Americans and the Brits and the French, and all of the intrigue, and it's fascinating. All of this is new to me. So talk a little bit about that in our region of the Gulf Coast.
So when we talk about Native American groups from 10,000 plus years ago, we call that period the Paleo Indian period. We unfortunately don't know what they called themselves, but we do have technology and artifacts that help us define that period. And of course, we can do all sorts of testing and multiple lines of evidence to know what we're looking at. And then we move through the Archaic and the Woodland periods. And these, the Woodland is when are the pottery makers and the artisans. The Archaic is generally, they were marvelous engineers. Dr. Wazelkoff, who is our professor emeritus and who founded the museum, recently did work in Gulf Shores on this amazing canal that was built by these archaic engineers. And their technology is amazing too. And you can see the evolution of the technology here at the museum, and the pottery and the lithics. So we have that available for you to look at. We also have a major exhibit featuring our Mississippian, and that's what we call the period right before the Europeans arrived. It's the height of civilization in North America, and we call them the Mound Builders. They're the ones that made these huge mounds. We have mounds, of course, everyone knows Moundville. But we also have mounds just north of Mobile, an amazing mound site, and USA Archaeology has done excavations there, and we have an exhibit about them. So again, and they started farming to have these large city centers. So we have the advent of agriculture during this time. And my favorite period, I'm glad you brought that up, Cynthia. I am a historical archaeologist, but my favorite period is what archaeologists call contact. That is when worlds collide. All the different Native American groups, and they have different languages, different traditions, different Europeans, of course, the French, the English, the British. There's probably some Portuguese and some Dutch in there. And there's also Africans who are coming to the New World. So we have documents of Africans serving as ship captains. There's different things going on, lots of different things, and they're all meeting each other at the same time. And they're just, things are just happening very, very quickly. And it's a fascinating period. And I really enjoy it because it has, the Native American element and the prehistorical element, as well as, the historical element, and they're meeting, and it's this period of fast cultural change. And so it's very interesting to me.
I am so glad you mentioned Africans in this mix. As you know, even better than I, there has been a lot of excitement in the last year and a half around the discovery of the Clotilda and what that might mean for the rebuilding of an exploration of the community known as Africatown. Do you think that the Archaeological Museum might eventually have exhibits related to that community and everything that's going on down there?
Yes. Yes. And if I definitely think so. The Archaeology Museum has done archaeology or the Center for Archaeological Studies recently did archaeology in Africatown this past spring because they're building a welcome center.
Right.
And it is across the street from the historic cemetery. And so we were able to use non-invasive techniques, ground penetrating radar, things like that, as well as Dr. Kernan Jackson, the director of African American Studies. He conducted oral history and has for several years. So he was on site with our team, talking to folks and making sure, what do you remember? Do you remember any burials where this welcome center is going to go? That would be the last thing that anybody would want, would be to disturb those ancestors. And so just making sure that this was a good place for the welcome center and that we're not disturbing anyone. And so I hope that the museum's relationship and the Center for Archaeological Studies relationship with Africatown can continue. It is a very exciting time to be an archaeologist in Mobile, and it's also a wonderful benefit to the community. This is national news.
Absolutely.
This is tourism. This is cultural heritage. People want to know. We always talk about archaeology, protect the past for the future. The way that we can move forward into the future is by understanding what happened in the past. And so having the Clotilda and having Africa Town here in Mobile is amazing. It's unparalleled, and it's a wonderful resource.
I am once again amazed, and I would like for you to repeat what you said a little earlier about the 3 college campuses where there are archaeological museums. Would you say that again, please?
Harvard, Penn State, University of South Alabama.
That is just amazing. And you talked about, and I am sure at probably 2 of those places, Harvard might be the exception, but there's probably always a struggle for funds. Talk a little bit more, though. You were getting to this when you talked about knowing the past. Help our audience to understand why the museum and what the museum does is helpful to the larger community.
So there's lots of careers in archaeology and anthropology, and there's lots of places where those skill sets are highly desired. So database analysis, statistical analysis, marketing and communications, hospitality and tourism. We know that tourism brings, I can't quote the statistic right now, but having places for tourism in a community brings a lot of jobs and a lot of money. So having that here benefits our students immensely. They are able to, there's geographic information systems, which archaeologists use in mapping and to create our maps, and many companies use geographic information systems to compile data about where would be the best location for the next Walmart based on lots of different factors. So archaeologists learn how to look at large amounts of data very quickly and break it down. Anthropologists are also, they work in human resources, and we study people and human behavior, and they work in human resources. They work in design, for example, looking at a car. How do we make this car user friendly? What sort of features do people want? So the possibilities for careers in anthropology are just amazing and everywhere. And having the museum here helps students have internships, volunteer opportunities. Of course, they learn how to give museum tours and those sorts of skills, but they also learn a lot more. And those skills benefit them when it comes to the job search. And it benefits the community. It brings people here. I have people visit from all over the country who come just to come to the archaeology museum.
And we can see your excitement about the museum and about your field. Before we leave for the day, though, I certainly want to give the audience an opportunity to ask you questions. If anybody has any questions, please type them into the chat box. You have given us so much fascinating information today. I'm going to put the museum on my agenda. I'm going to be sure that my 7th grader gets over there. They have in the 5th and 6th grades. She studied Native American culture, so I want her to come over. And let me now turn it over to Ms. Washington to see if she has anything to tell our audience.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, and thank you, Jen. At this time, we are at the end of the program. Our winner for today is no longer on with us, and we had to stay on for the full time. So we'll reach out to Sharon Brown, I think is our next person in line to win our prize for being here today. And thank you, audience. Back to you, Cynthia.
Thank you for joining us today. Jen, thank you so much. That was a wonderful talk about the museum and archaeology in general. And we hope the audience will join us for our next Talk Thursday in our fall session. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. And I would be amiss if I didn't mention urban planning, historic preservation. Anyone who loves forensic files, archaeologists go into work in forensics and genetics and all of that. So yes, come see me at the museum. I'll be glad to answer your questions in person and give you a tour.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming. And thank you again for having me.